Hello there, this is Simon from Tokyo Productions and welcome to another tutorial for Motion 5. And this time, instead of bringing you a new tutorial, I'm going to be revisiting an existing one that has proved quite popular, but where I think I rushed along a bit too quickly and assumed a bit too much knowledge in the viewer. And that's this particle collision tutorial. And another reason for revisiting it is that I think I've improved it in a number of ways and simplified it in the process. So let's get started. I'm going to make a new project. I'm going to select Broadcast HD 720. I'm going to choose a frame rate of 24 frames a second, and I'm going to leave the default duration at 10 seconds, and then I'm going to open that. And the first thing we need to do is to make a background. So let's come to the library by hitting Command 2. And we'll come to the generator section. And we'll use the color solid. And we'll click Apply. We'll hit Command 3 to come to the inspector. And then we'll twirl open this color swatch. And we'll type in a value for the blue of 0.1. Then let's come back to the library, Command 2, and to give it a bit more interest to this background, we're going to use the star generator and Apply. Command 3 to come to the inspector. We'll set the radius to 40. Then we will come back to the library, Command 2, the filters section. We'll scroll down to the distortion category. Scroll to the bottom of the distortion category, and we want two filters from here. We want twirl and underwater, so I'll select twirl, then I will hold down the command key and I'll select underwater, and I'll hit apply. Command 3 to come back to the inspector. I'm going to set the twirl value to -90, leave the rest as is. The underwater size I'm going to set to 0.5, the speed to 0.01, and the refraction to 200. And what I'll do is I'll set a mix value of 60%, so that combines it with the original. Then I'll select that underwater on its own, and I will hit Command D to make a copy of it. Command D. I will set the size of the copy to 1. Then I'm going to come back to the library, Command 2, Filters, Color Correction, and I'm going to select Colorize and apply that. Command 3 to come to the inspector. Click on the Remap Black swatch, drag the brightness slider all the way down. Click on the Remap White swatch and bring the color down to here somewhere and reduce the brightness quite a long way down to about there. So next I'm going to close up that group by hitting its disclosure triangle. Closes it up, makes things tidy. And I'm going to make a duplicate of it by hitting Command D. Very useful, Command D to make a duplicate. The duplicate, I'm going to set the radius for the star generator to 20. I'm going to come to its properties by hitting F1, and down here where it says blending blend mode, I'm going to set that to screen. I'm going to come back to the generator, F4, and I think I might just play with that spike angle, something about 50 degrees, just so I get something a little bit different. Now if we hit F8 to go to full screen and play that, you'll see that I've got an interesting texture. F8 to come out of that again, F6 to hide the timeline. Let's name this top group background. And let's again hit the disclosure triangle to close it up. Okay, let's move on and let's start making some particles. So the first step is to make a new group. And I'm going to hit Command-Shift-N. And I'm going to call it Elements, because I want to put a couple of things into this, and one of which is going to be the particle base. So I'm going to hit the C key, which activates the circle tool. You could also come down to this menu right at the bottom here and select circle if you prefer. Okay, we're going to hold down the Shift key, which makes a circle rather than an ellipse, and we're going to drag a very, very small circle. And let's rename that particle. And just to keep things tidy, come to its properties, here where we've got that backwards arrow, hit that, and that puts it into the center of the screen. Very useful tip to know. And I want to do one other thing while I'm in this group, and that's to create a path. So I'm going to come back down to the Shape menu, click and hold, and select the Line tool. And starting at the bottom here, just off screen, I'm going to draw diagonally up from the bottom left to the top right. If I select the arrow tool, turn on the overlays, Command/, hit the Tab key 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, I will come to the edit points, and I can just adjust that edit point down there and that one there, just to get them precisely lined up. Not necessary, but I like to be tidy. So let's come back to the Transform tool. Let's call this line path, because that's going to be the path for our particles. Okay, now we need to turn the particle into an emitter. So let's hit E, having selected the particle, and you'll see that's made an emitter. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to take that emitter and I'm going to drag it out, upwards, out, and that makes a new group. And I'm going to close down the Elements group by hitting its disclosure triangle, and I'm going to hide it by clicking here, and that hides the group. I'm going to call this new group Particles 1, and the emitter I'm also going to call Emitter 1. Keep things tidy. If I hit Shift Z, that zooms in on the canvas so we can see what's happening, and you can see I've got a stream of particles coming out. I'm going to hit Command/ to turn off the overlay. Okay, let's come to the emitter properties. We can make a few changes. First of all, let's turn up the birth rate, just for the purposes of getting us started, to 100. Let's change the life down to 4. The speed we'll leave at 100. Incidentally, I'm tabbing through to get to these different values. Tabbing just takes you down to the next value. The speed tab does speed randomness. I'm going to set that to 250. I'm going to check this box which says additive blend, and then where it says color mode, I'm going to choose over life instead of original. Then that creates this gradient here, and I'm going to twirl that open. And now, if you're not familiar with the gradient, this top bar here represents the opacity over life, and the bottom represents the color over life. The color over life, I'm pretty much happy with that default gradient as it happens, but I want them to fade out over so they don't just pop off when they die. So I'm going to click on this top bar, and that, you see that makes a new tab. I'm going to drag it all the way to the right. I'm going to scroll down, and here where it says opacity, I'm going to enter a value of 0. And now you'll see there's a little triangle right in the middle there. I'm going to click on that, and that activates this middle property. And I'm going to set that value to 90. You'll see that's moved that triangle pretty much all the way to the right. That means they're just going to fade out right at the end of their life. There we go. Now those particles are too big. Now all of this is going to depend on how large you made that original circle. But let's, in this case, reduce that scale value. Let's try 20. That's too small. Let's try 50, 40. 40 will do me. We want them pretty small. And because we don't want them all to be exactly the same size, let's set a randomness value of double the scale, so 80%. You can play with this as you like, but I think doubling the randomness in relation to the scale is a pretty good way to start. Okay, so that's our emitter created. And now we need to make it move, because at the moment it's just sitting there in the middle of the screen, pumping out particles, and we want it to fly along that path that we created earlier. So let's come to the library, Command 2. Let's come to the Behaviors section, Basic Motion, and we'll apply the Motion Path behavior. There we go. Let's open up our elements, because we'll need to access that path. We'll hit Command 3 to come to the inspector for the motion path. Here where it says Path Shape, I'm going to select Geometry, which will enable me to use that path that I've already created. So now I need to populate that shape source well with the path. I'll drag the path into the shape source well. Now if we hit play, you'll see those particles move along that path. At the moment, they're taking the entire duration of that 10 seconds of my project to reach their destination in the top right hand corner. I don't want that. In actual fact, I want them to have arrived at 2 seconds. So I'm going to double click on the timecode display there, and I'm going to enter 200, which takes me to the 2 second mark. I've got my motion path behavior selected. I'm going to hit O on the keyboard, and you'll see that that affects a trim on that motion path. And now if we hit play, let's go to F8 to see how it happens. You'll see they shoot off across those 2 seconds. F8 again, and let's leave the timeline open, and you can see that's the trimmed motion path there. Right, let's close up that elements group, because we're actually done with it for now. Use the disclosure triangle. The path is just straight at the moment, it just follows that directly. I want to make that a little bit more interesting, so I'm going to come to the emitter. I'm going to hit F1 to come to its properties. On the position, transform position, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to add parameter behavior wriggle. So let's set the wriggle amount to 25. The apply mode will set to add and subtract. The frequency will set to 5 because we want it to wriggle quite a lot. Let's make sure here where it says apply to, right click there, properties, transform, position, X and Y. And now if we hit F8, come back to the beginning, you'll see that jiggles around a bit more, much nicer. Okay, that's pretty good. Now we want to create the effect where it gets spun around when it hits the other particle coming from the opposite direction. And to do that, we're going to apply a behavior, and we're going to apply it to that group rather than the emitter. So let's select the group, Let's hit Command 2 to come to the library. We're in Behaviors, but we need to come down to Simulations, and at the bottom of Simulations we're going to select Vortex, and we're going to apply that. Let's come to 1 second by typing that into the timecode display, and let's trim the vortex so it begins at that frame. So we've got the vortex selected, we'll hit I on the keyboard. So I only want this vortex behavior to last for half a second. So I'll come to 1:12, bearing in mind this is 24 frames a second, and I'll hit O on the keyboard. Now let's hit F8 to see the result. Come to the start, and you'll see that they get a nice kick as they hit that vortex. Okay, F8 to come back out of that. Let's come to the inspector, Command 3, and just adjust that vortex just a little bit. The strength we're going to set to 100. The fall off rate to 2. And the drag we'll set to 2. Let's leave the include X and Y as they are at the defaults, but let's change the direction. I want it to come counterclockwise. Let's have a look how that looks. F8, come to the start, press play. That's nice. I like the way that's spinning counterclockwise, shooting those particles off. F8 to come back out of that. And I want to add one extra behavior to this particles group. I'll hit Command 2 to come back to the library. Still in Simulations, I'll select Gravity and apply that. And you'll notice that's affected the background as soon as I added that. So let's come to the Inspector, Command 3, and I'll make sure that the Effect Subobjects is selected. And now that's no longer interfering with my background. Gravity obviously pulls things downwards, but I actually want a negative gravity. So I'm going to type a value of -10 and hit F8 again. Those particles will drift upwards. Good. Okay, so that's particles 1 sorted. I need to obviously have my particles that come in from the top right hand corner. So I don't have to go through that whole process again. I'm just going to select that particles 1 group, hit Command D, which we now know is to create a duplicate. I'm going to rename this particles 2, hit the disclosure triangle to open it up. I'm going to rename this emitter 2, just so we know exactly what's happening. Open its disclosure triangle, select the motion path, hit F2 to come to the behavior properties. Now here's our motion path, and all we have to do is, where it says direction, instead of forward, we're going to select reverse. And if we hit F8, come to the start, press play, you'll see that's done the job for me in one go. It's sending those particles off down the opposite direction of the path that I created. Let's hit F8 to come back out again. And what we could do is we could come to the wriggle behavior, and let's just click on that random seed. And the advantage of that is it introduces an element of randomness without my having to worry about anything else. We don't want them to look exactly the same. So just click on random seed, generate. And I might also come to the emitter itself, F4 to come to its properties. Let's scroll all the way down, close up that color over life. And here where it says random seed, let's click on that as well. So again, you probably saw that just every time I click on random seed, it creates a different calculation of that randomness, those random values. Right, now there's something I should have done a little bit earlier on, and that's to keyframe the birth rate of the particles, so that at the point at which they collide, which is 1 second, let's go to 1 second, they want to start reducing the birth rate. So I've got emitter 2 selected. I'm going to come to that birth rate value and click on the keyframe button. And I'm going to come to 2 seconds, which is the point at which they have hit their corners. And I'm going to drag that down till the value is 0. So now that will animate down from 100 down to 0 over the course of that 1 second. Let's twirl open particles 1. Let's select emitter 1. Let's keyframe the birth rate at 2 seconds. Let's set it to 0. Let's come back to 1 second and set it to 100. So we've just done exactly the same thing in reverse with the second emitter. Okay, let's close up both those two groups, hit their disclosure triangles. Let's click on Project. Let's make a new group, Command-Shift-N, and let's call this group Particles. And let's select both Particles 1 and Particles 2, holding the Shift key, and drag them into that group, and close it up. Right, next up we need to move on to creating the lens flares which lead the particles. But this is probably just as good a point as any to take a break, so let's come back and start work on that in part 2. Hope to see you then.